I'm Franklin. 1963 was a year of grand promises and bright futures. The year was 1963, and Chicago was a city that felt like it was made of wet soot and rusted iron. The wind howling off Lake Michigan didn't just carry the cold. It carried the smell of industrial waste and the silent desperation of 1 million souls trapped in the tenements of the South Side. In the heart of this gray labyrinth stood St. Jude's Municipal Hospital, a towering Gothic pile of limestone and soot-stained brick that looked more like a prison than a place of healing. Inside, the air was a thick, suffocating cocktail of cheap Lysol, boiled cabbage, and the sweet, heavy scent of unwashed bodies and slow decay. Arthur Cole was 24 years old, a top-tier medical intern with a pristine record and a heart full of the kind of naive idealism that the city loved to grind into the pavement. He had come to St. Jude's to make a difference, to serve the silent population, the veterans with hollow eyes, the homeless who slept in the shadow of the L train, and the immigrants who spoke no English but understood the language of pain perfectly. But within weeks, Arthur realized that St. Jude's wasn't a hospital. It was a sorting facility. He was assigned to the East Wing, a section the veteran staff referred to as the herbarium. It was a quiet, low-lit place where the linoleum floors were polished to a mirror shine, and the nurses moved like specters, never speaking above a whisper. Officially, it was a long-term care unit for non-responsive patients, those in deep comas or suffering from catastrophic neurological failure. But Arthur noticed things that didn't fit the clinical narrative. First, there was the temperature. Even in the blistering humidity of a Chicago July, the walls of the East Wing were bone-chillingly cold. If you pressed your ear to the painted brick, you could hear a distant, rhythmic thrumming, a deep mechanical vibration that felt like the heartbeat of a giant. It wasn't the sound of a boiler. It was the sound of heavy-duty industrial refrigeration. Second, there was the inventory. Every night, unmarked laundry trucks arrived at the loading dock. They didn't bring linens. They brought heavy, insulated crates, and they left with something wrapped in thick, black plastic. Don't let your curiosity get the better of you, Arthur. Dr. Eris, the chief of surgery, had told him once, his voice as smooth and cold as a silver tray. Some patients require specialized environments, high oxygen, low temperature protocols. It's cutting-edge science. Focus on your charts, not the basement. But Arthur couldn't focus. He started noticing that patients who were admitted for minor surgeries, a broken leg, a routine appendectomy, were occasionally transferred to the East Wing due to sudden complications. Once they crossed those double doors, they vanished from the hospital's public records. On a rainy Tuesday in October, Arthur found a master key left in a neglected lab coat. The vibration in the floor was stronger that night, a low-frequency hum that made his teeth ache. He waited until the night nurse was busy with a delivery, and he slipped into the service elevator. He didn't press L for lobby. He pressed B2, a floor that wasn't listed on the building's directory. The elevator doors slid open with a hiss of pressurized air. The smell hit him first. Not the usual hospital stench, but something sharp, sterile, and metallic. It smelled like the inside of a meat locker. The basement was a cathedral of stainless steel and blue fluorescent light. The walls were lined with vertical plexiglass capsules, each one filled with a thick, iridescent gel. And inside the gel, suspended like prehistoric insects in amber, were the vanished patients of St. Jude's. They weren't dead. Their eyes were closed, their limbs limp, but thin tubes connected to their femoral arteries showed a slow, rhythmic pulse of dark, oxygenated fluid. They were in a state of suspended animation, their metabolic processes slowed to a crawl. Arthur walked down the row, his breath coming in ragged gasps that turned to mist in the freezing air. He stopped at pod No. 402. Inside was a young woman he recognized, a waitress from the diner across the street who had been admitted for a simple concussion 2 weeks ago. Now she was a unit. Attached to her pod was a stainless steel clipboard with a shipping manifest. Subject, No. 402. Status, Prime, Heart, pre-ordered by Sterling Development Corp. Delivery date, 11/22/63. Grade, AOA, non-smoker, athletic. Arthur's world tilted. He wasn't looking at a medical experiment. He was looking at a human warehouse. St. Jude's was harvesting the poor to provide replacement parts for the architects of the new world. It was a cold, calculated business of flesh. As he backed away, his elbow caught a metal tray, sending a tray of surgical scalpels clattering to the floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the sterile silence. Suddenly, the heavy steel doors at the far end of the hall began to cycle open. Arthur scrambled for a place to hide, ducking behind a massive nitrogen tank. Through the gap in the machinery, he saw 2 men enter. They wore long, blood-stained leather aprons over their scrubs and heavy industrial respirators that made them look like insects. "The CEO's pilot just landed at Midway," one of them said, his voice muffled by the mask. "He wants the heart for pod 402 extracted tonight. The buyer is anxious. Apparently, his current one is failing faster than the doctors predicted." "Check the candidate first," the second man replied, gesturing toward a black and white monitor on the wall. "The auditor says we have a new prime specimen in the intern pool. We need to make sure his stress levels stay low. We don't want to ruin the adrenaline balance." Arthur looked at the monitor. It was a live feed of the East Wing staff lounge. The camera was zoomed in on the chair where Arthur usually took his breaks. Then, he looked down at his own arm. Beneath the skin of his forearm, a faint, bluish tattoo was beginning to glow in the ultraviolet light of the basement. A series of numbers and a single word: audit. He wasn't an intern. He was an investment. He had been brought to St. Jude's not to save lives, but to grow a perfect, healthy heart for a man who owned the city. And now, the harvest was starting. The realization that he was a walking organ bank made Arthur's heart hammer against his ribs, a frantic, rhythmic thud that now felt like a countdown. He stared at the blue audit tattoo on his arm. It wasn't just ink. It was a tracking filament, a bioreactive mark that monitored his vitals in real time. Every surge of adrenaline, every spike in blood pressure was being logged by the machines in the walls. To them, his fear wasn't a human emotion. It was a potential contaminant that could spoil the merchandise. The 2 men in leather aprons, the extractors, began to move toward pod 402, their heavy boots clacking on the steel floor. One of them reached for a long hooked pole designed to haul the frozen bodies from their gel-filled tombs. Arthur knew he had seconds before they noticed the misplaced master key or the scuff marks on the floor. He didn't head for the elevator. They would trap him there like a rat in a box. Instead, he ducked into a narrow maintenance crawl space labeled Waste Management, Level B3. If Level B2 was a cathedral of cold, Level B3 was the gut of a slaughterhouse. As Arthur scrambled down the rusted iron ladder, the temperature rose, and the smell of ozone was replaced by a cloying, humid stench of scorched hair and copper. This was where the rejected material went. The subjects whose bodies had rejected the preservation gel, or whose organs had failed during the grueling extraction process. The lights here were dim, flickering amber bulbs protected by heavy wire cages. The floor was slick with an unidentifiable grayish sludge. Arthur moved through a forest of hanging plastic curtains, their surfaces stained with dark, dried streaks. Behind the curtains, he saw what the hospital hid even from its elite buyers. These weren't capsules, they were cages. Inside were the failed units. People who had survived the harvesting of a non-essential organ, a lung, a kidney, a strip of skin, only to be discarded when their minds broke under the trauma. They weren't being treated. They were being kept alive just long enough for their remaining tissues to be rendered into surgical adhesives or experimental serums. One man, his face a patchwork of crude, heavy thread sutures, reached a trembling hand through the bars. His eyes were gone, replaced by smooth, grafted skin. He didn't scream. He just made a soft, wet clicking sound with his tongue, a language of the broken. Arthur stumbled back, his boots splashing in the sludge. He realized that the Sterling Development Corp didn't just buy organs. They bought the entire human life cycle, turning every ounce of a person into a line item on a balance sheet. "Intern Cole," the PA system hissed, the voice of Dr. Eris echoing through the damp tunnels of B3. "You are experiencing an acute sympathetic nervous system response. This is detrimental to the cardiac tissue. We strongly advise you to initiate deep breathing exercises. Your value is dropping, Arthur. Don't make us liquidate you prematurely." The threat wasn't just a warning. It was a command. Suddenly, the audit tattoo on his arm began to pulse with a sharp, stinging heat. They were using the filament to deliver a localized sedative, trying to numb him into submission so they could collect him without a fight. Arthur grabbed a discarded surgical bone chisel from a tray of rusted tools. Without hesitating, he pressed the cold steel against the tattoo and sliced upward. The pain was white-hot, a jagged lightning bolt that shot up his arm, but he didn't stop until he felt the thin, metallic wire of the filament snap. He ripped the glowing thread from his flesh and threw it into the gray sludge. On the monitors above, his vitals flatlined. To the system, Arthur Cole had just died. He ran. He followed the sound of rushing water, hoping it led to the city's sewer system. But the path took him through the refinement lab. Here, in the glare of harsh white lights, Arthur saw the true face of the 1960s medical boom. Huge vats of human blood were being spun in centrifuges, while technicians in pristine white coats documented the effects of Batch 77, the sedative they were pumping into the slums. He saw the maps on the wall. The hospital wasn't just a building. It was the hub of a network. Red lines connected St. Jude's to the police precincts, the mayor's office, and a proposed luxury housing project called Greenwich Valley. "It's a closed system, kid," a voice rasped from a dark corner of the lab. Arthur spun around, raising his blood-stained chisel. An old man sat in a wheelchair, his legs missing, his chest a maze of plastic tubes. He was wearing a tattered doctor's coat. "I was the chief auditor in '58, the old man said, his voice a dry rattle. "I thought I could skim a little off the top. A few kidneys for the black market. They caught me. Now I'm the filter. They run the experimental serums through my liver to see how long it takes to dissolve. You think you're escaping? There is no outside. This city is just a larger version of this basement. The air you breathe, the water you drink. It's all part of the inventory." "I'm getting out," Arthur whispered, his eyes wide with horror. "I'm going to the press. I'm going to show them the manifests." The old man laughed, a hollow, bubbling sound. "The press? Who do you think owns the papers? Who do you think pays the editor's medical bills? You're not a whistleblower, son. You're a fugitive heart, and the hunters are already in the hall." As if on cue, the heavy reinforced doors of the lab began to buckle. The extractors had found him. They weren't using master keys anymore. They were using a hydraulic ram. Arthur looked at the old doctor, then at a heavy pressurized tank of medical ether near the centrifuge. "If I can't be a donor," Arthur said, his voice turning cold and hard, "then I'll be the poison." He slammed the chisel into the valve of the ether tank and kicked over a tray of lit Bunsen burners. The explosion of the ether tank wasn't a roar. It was a sudden, violent expansion of white heat that turned the refinement lab into a pressure cooker. The blast wave shattered the glass centrifuges, sending shards of human-grade vials flying like shrapnel. Arthur was thrown across the room, his back slamming into a row of filing cabinets. His vision swam, and his lungs burned with the chemical sting of the vapor. But he was alive. Through the roiling orange flames, he saw the extractors. Their leather aprons were melting, and their industrial respirators hissed as the heat warped the rubber. They weren't screaming. They were move perfect, still trying to calculate the most efficient path to secure their primary asset, even as the room disintegrated around them. "The heart!" one of them bellowed through his mask, his voice distorted by the fire. "Secure the chest cavity. Don't let the smoke contaminate the valves." Arthur scrambled to his feet, ignoring the searing pain in his arm where he'd carved out the tracker. He didn't head for the exit. He headed for the laundry chute, a vertical steel tunnel that dropped straight into the heart of the hospital's massive coal-fired furnaces. It was a suicide move, but the hallways were already swarming with security guards in sterile white tactical gear. He dove into the chute just as a spray of bullets sparked against the metal rim. The slide was a blur of darkness and the smell of scorched linen. He hit the bottom with a bone-jarring thud, landing on a pile of blood-soaked sheets waiting to be incinerated. The heat here was monumental. Huge iron doors groaned as the mechanical stokers fed the flames that powered the hospital's massive cooling system. The irony wasn't lost on Arthur. They burned the waste to keep the elite frozen. He climbed out of the heap, his skin slick with sweat and soot. This was the bowels of the beast. Here, the clean image of St. Jude's died. He saw huge mounds of discarded prosthetic limbs, empty medicine crates, and, most hauntingly, stacks of small wooden boxes with no names, only batch numbers. "Going somewhere, Arthur?" The voice didn't come from a loudspeaker. It came from the shadows near the furnace controls. Dr. Eris stood there, looking impossibly composed in his tailored suit, holding a silver-plated .38 snub-nose revolver. Behind him stood a man Arthur had never seen before. A tall, skeletal figure in a gray overcoat, holding a stopwatch. The auditor. "You've been a fascinating study, Cole," Eris said, his eyes reflecting the orange glow of the fires. "Most candidates break during the extraction phase, but you've triggered a level 4 systemic failure just to keep your pulse going. Do you have any idea how much that increases your value?" "You're sick," Arthur rasped, his hand gripping a heavy iron fire poker he'd pulled from the rack. "You're killing people to keep a bunch of old ghouls breathing." "We are preserving the architecture of civilization, Arthur," Eris replied, stepping closer. "The men who buy from us are the men who build the bridges, the skyscrapers, and the laws you live by. Their lives are worth 1,000 of yours. We aren't killers. We are curators of greatness." The man in the gray coat clicked his stopwatch. "Adrenaline levels are peaking. The myocardium is in optimal stress response. If we harvest him in the next 6 minutes, the heart will be the most resilient specimen we've ever produced. Proceed." Eris raised the gun, aiming for Arthur's kneecap. "Don't be a hero, son. You're just a very expensive piece of meat. Let's make this professional." Arthur didn't look at the gun. He looked at the main steam pressure gauge behind Eris. The explosion in the lab had already compromised the cooling lines, and the pressure in the boiler was climbing into the red zone. The hospital was a bomb. and the fuse was already lit. "You want my heart?" Arthur yelled, his voice cracking with a mix of terror and defiance. "Then come and take it while it's still burning." Instead of lunging at Aris, Arthur swung the fire poker with everything he had, smashing the glass housing of the main steam regulator. The scream of escaping high-pressure steam was deafening. A white wall of scalding vapor erupted between them, hitting Aris full in the face. The doctor shrieked, his polished facade melting away as the 300-degree steam stripped the skin from his bones. He fired the revolver blindly, the bullets thudding harmlessly into the coal piles. The man in the gray coat didn't flinch. He simply stepped back, checked his watch again, and began to walk calmly toward the emergency exit. To him, this wasn't a tragedy. It was a failed data point. Arthur didn't wait to see if Aris was dead. He lunged for the service ladder that led to the hospital's ventilation towers on the roof. He climbed through the dark, the air getting thinner and hotter as the building's internal systems began to melt down. He reached the roof just as the first of the hospital's massive oxygen tanks exploded below. The shockwave nearly threw him over the edge. Chicago lay before him, a sea of flickering lights, oblivious to the nightmare occurring in the gray fortress at its center. He saw the refrigerated trucks in the courtyard, their engines idling. They weren't waiting for organs anymore. They were waiting for him. "You can't leave the loop, Arthur," a voice crackled over the roof's emergency PA system. It was Aris, or what was left of him, his voice a wet, bubbling ruin. "The Sterling Group owns the air you're breathing. You're already theirs." Arthur looked at the city, then at the black car waiting at the edge of the hospital gates. He realized that escaping the building wasn't enough. The hospital was just the heart of the infection. The entire city was the body. He took a deep breath of the soot-choked air and climbed down the rusted fire escape, heading for the one place he knew they wouldn't look: the slums. The very place they had been poisoning with Batch 77. If he was going to survive, he had to disappear into the waste. 3 days after the fires at St. Jude's were extinguished, Chicago looked the same as it always did: gray, indifferent, and cold. The official news reports claimed a tragic boiler explosion had claimed the lives of several dedicated medical professionals, including the heroic Dr. Aris. There was no mention of the basement, no mention of the blue gel, and certainly no mention of the herbarium. Arthur Cole was hiding in a condemned tenement in the West Side, a place where the wallpaper peeled like sunburnt skin and the air tasted of wet plaster. He was shivering, feverish from the infection in his arm where he had carved out the tracker. He sat in the dark, clutching the stolen manifests, waiting for a contact from the Chicago Tribune who had promised to meet him. He thought he had won. He had destroyed the hub. He had released the Batch 77 logs. He had exposed the Sterling Development Corp. But as the clock on the wall ticked toward midnight, Arthur noticed something. The silence in the hallway wasn't the silence of an empty building. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of a vacuum. He looked at the window. The streetlights outside weren't flickering. They were steady, glowing with a new, pristine white light that didn't belong in this slum. There was a soft knock at the door, not the frantic knock of a journalist, but 3 rhythmic professional taps. "Arthur," a voice said. It wasn't Aris. It was the man in the gray coat, the auditor. "We've reviewed the footage from the roof. Your performance was exemplary." Arthur raised his iron poker, his knuckles white. "Stay back. I have the papers. I sent copies to the papers." The door opened slowly. The auditor stood there holding a morning edition of the Chicago Tribune. He tossed it onto the floor. The headline read, "Municipal Reform Act Passed. Sterling Group to oversee city health care. The papers didn't print your story, Arthur, the auditor said, stepping into the room. They used your evidence as a justification for a total corporate takeover. They told the public that the chaos at St. Jude's was proof that the government couldn't be trusted with human lives. The Sterling Group is now the official provider for every citizen in this district. You didn't destroy the machine. You gave it the keys to the city. Arthur felt the floor give way beneath his feet. The manifests, the explosion, the fire. It had all been the perfect propaganda. He had been the disgruntled element they needed to justify privatizing life itself. "And what about me?" Arthur whispered, the iron poker slipping from his hand. "Your heart, Arthur. It's a masterpiece," the auditor said, looking at his stopwatch. "The trauma of the last 72 hours has strengthened the ventricular walls beyond our wildest projections. The CEO doesn't just want your heart anymore. He wants your legacy. He wants the heart of the man who tried to burn him down." The auditor stepped aside, and two men entered. They weren't wearing leather aprons. They were wearing the high-tech white surgical suits of the future, the kind Arthur would have seen in a sci-fi magazine. They carried a mobile containment unit, the blue light of the preservation gel glowing through the glass. "You aren't going to a hospital, Arthur," the auditor said. "You're going to the foundation. We've started a new project in the suburbs, a place called Greenwich Valley. We need a patient zero for the underground facility, someone whose vitals are legendary." Arthur tried to scream, but his lungs felt heavy, as if the air in the room had been replaced by that familiar, sweet-smelling gas. His vision began to fade into a familiar, icy blue. As they lifted him onto the gurney, the last thing Arthur saw was the auditor marking a new file. Subject: Cole Arthur. Status: archived. Location: Greenwich Valley, level 0. Note: the heartbeat of the new world. Years later, the residents of the perfect, sun-drenched streets of Greenwich Valley would talk about how the air felt so fresh and how the water tasted so clean. They didn't know that deep beneath their feet, in a room that was always ice cold, a single heart was still beating once every 3 minutes, powering the very dream they were living in. The audit was complete. The merchandise was home.